Okay, I think we're ready to start sewing again. We're up to the straps, so let me get organized here. My straps I'm making for these little outfits are about 5/8 of an inch wide. I kind of like that. I like that width, and they're 3.5 inches for this size outfit. Now your smaller dolls will be a smaller strap, and of course your bigger dolls will have a bigger strap. I'm going to make a turn down. I just cut a strip of fabric, and I'm going to turn that down a little bit so that when I turn it inside out, I'm already going to have an almost finished edge. So if you've got your sewing machine and you follow these lines on your machine, if you use the 5/8 of an inch right here, your needle position has to be in the 0, 0. If you're any other position, if you're in the middle position and you use that 5/8 of an inch, you're not going to get a 5/8 of an inch seam. So these metal bars are all made up based on the fact that your needle is always going to be in the far left position. So that's something you need to remember when you're trying to use your guides on this machine. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use my guides, and I'm going to sew this 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to use my 5/8 of an inch guide. So let me go ahead and take this first pin out, and we'll go ahead and start sewing that. This is longer than what I need, but it doesn't matter, because I'm just going to cut it off. Okay, so we've got that. Let me get some clips here and clip my threads here. And we are going to turn this. I'm going to cut this down to, probably a little less than 1/4 of an inch. You can go 1/4 of an inch if you want to. Just trim that down. If you've got a loop turner, use your loop turner. If you don't have a loop turner, you can always use a safety pin. Okay, so let's go ahead and get this turned. Sometimes it comes real easy and sometimes it doesn't. It's a little bit harder when I have that extra flap down of fabric, but I prefer doing it that way. That's just my way of doing it. Okay, doesn't want to go. Sometimes these come so easy, and sometimes you just got to fight with them. You just never know how it's going to be on any given piece of fabric. There's so many variables. Come on, it's almost there. There we go. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to use my handy quill here. And there's that seam in the middle, so I'm just going to open that up, and I am going to finger press these. You can get your iron out if you want to, but I'm just going to finger press that seam right down the center. Okay. And then I'm going to take a pin, and I'm going to right down the center. You can't really see because I've got pink fabric down here, but I'm just going to center this completely. And because I cut that 1/4 inch there, it's going to give me a really nice edge. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to do a top stitch all the way around this. So I'm going to go back to my middle of my stitching. You can see what I'm seeing. Okay, I'm going to go back to middle needle position, and I'm going to top stitch all around this strap. Went off the thing, but it doesn't matter because you're not even going to see this. Okay, so now I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to cut this down to 3.5 inches. So go to 3.5 inches. 1, 2, 3.5. I'm on the wrong side of the ruler, but that's okay. 3.5 inches. Okay, 3.5. Okay. Measure that with this one. And it's almost exactly the same. Okay, so we've got that. So our next step is to cut ourselves some little strips of fabric. These are not them. Where did I put them? Here they are. Okay, I'm cutting myself some fabric. The most important part is making sure that they're only 1.25 inches wide. The width really doesn't matter because as long as all you have to worry about is that the width is bigger than this here. So make them at least 2.25, 2.5 inches. Because we're going to have to fit the strap in here, it's easier if you just make it a little bigger than you need. Okay, so our first thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of our strips of fabric and we're going to sew it to our back piece. But we're going to sew it with the right sides together, and this is going to be the first part of our back, top of our back piece. So we're going to turn this under 1/4 inch, and then we're just going to sew everything so it's all lined up just like we did on the front of the romper. Okay, so this is the first step, and this is just going to be your regular 5/8 of an inch. Oh, my needles are getting dull. Okay, so I'm going to go with my regular 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to sew straight across here. So that's basically all we did. We just sewed on a little square rectangle onto the top of our back shoulder blade, or whatever you want to call it. Okay, so now our next step is to position our strap. So if we put our strap here at the back, it's going to not work because then our strap will be coming. Let me just fold this down so you can see what I mean. All right, here's our back piece. I'll just do it like this. Okay, so there's our back piece, right? Just like that. Now, okay. So if we put our strap here, and then we go and try and put. Gosh, these pins are really getting bad. Sorry about that, my sister-in-law. Okay, so say that we want to put our strap here, that's the wrong position, because then when we go to put it on, we're going to say, oops, wrong, okay? I mean, I'm pointing this out because I did this. So this was the wrong place to be. So what we want to do is we want to get that on the right side of the shoulder towards the armhole. So put it into the armhole. And then when you go to put it on the doll, you'll have it in the right location. I mean, you can laugh, but I did it that way. And I had to take the whole thing out. Okay, so because we have our seam down the back, we want to make sure that we have this one being the pretty side, so that when we flip it, we'll have the right side of the fabric right. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to make sure your fabric is all up to the top, and you want to put your strap just right up, I guess you'd call that perpendicular, just line it up against the armhole so it's straight up. Okay, so if you're not sure about it, then put a 1/4 of an inch seam here and then turn it up and see if it's lined up. Okay, that's how you're going to line it up. It's just by eyeing it, and if it's off a little bit, it's not a big deal. You're never going to know. Okay, so let's go ahead and put a pin here to hold these down, and then we're going to take another piece of our strips here, and we're going to sew another one on top. I cut 4. Okay, so this one is going to go on top here, and we're just going to sew this one 1/4 of an inch all the way across. Okay. Now you can do it the same way as the front if you want to just tack on the strap, but then you're going to see the sewing. This way you're enclosing it in the stitching, and you're not going to see it at all. Okay, so let's go ahead and put that in at 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so now we've got our strap in, and we've got this almost finished. See? Okay, so next step is to, we're going to turn this just like we did the front, and we're going to sew up just like we did. So we're going to flip this 1/4 of an inch. Get this all straightened out. We're going to try and move we don't want to move the strap in too much. We just want to move it in a little bit so we can make sure we don't sew on top of that. Okay, so this is going to be our first stitch. So we're going to do the same thing we did on the front. We're going to, let me get my chalk, we're going to sew straight up just like we did. Okay, so we're going to go from the armhole straight up on our chalk line. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a test run on it with a gathering stitch to make sure that nothing is caught inside there. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go to my middle position. I'm going to put my needle down, and I'm going to ease it into that location, and I'm going to do a test run. Yep, and my thread got caught. My needle's twisted. Thread's twisted on my needle. I don't know why. Oh, this is got sewed on. Okay. My needle came down, and let's go needle down. Put that in where we want it, and we're going to do a test run. Okay, so that was our test run right on our chalk. Now let's lift this up and see how it looks. Make sure our strap was not caught. Looks good? Okay. So now we're going to go back in and we're going to do it correctly. We're going to do it with the regular thread. Okay, so let's go back down to our regular stitch, and we're going to sew right down there. I have a little too much flap on that, I think. It'll be fine. Okay, so let's go ahead and sew that. Okay, we don't have to worry about testing the other side because the other side doesn't have a strap on it. So we're just going to put our 1/4 inch. We're going to sew here, and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to take our chalk and we're going to mark it, and that's going to be our sew line. Okay, so this is going to be our sew line to our back 1/4 inch. Okay, so let's get that done. Okay, now you want this as smooth as you can get it, because if you don't, it's going to make a difference on your closure in the back. This was the first one I did, and I didn't do a very neat job. See how it sort of flares off to the back? That was my mistake. I didn't do a neat job. This one, much better. See how much nicer that just lines up now? That's what you're looking for. You're trying to get them as smooth as possible to get that closure just right on the money. Okay, I mean, it's no big deal if it does go off. That's my fault because I didn't trim my inside fabric, and this is a heavier, I don't know what you even call it. It's a textured cotton. Okay, so we're going to go here and we're going to trim down to 1/4 inch. We're going to miter our corners, miter this corner. We're going to trim to 1/4 inch, and we are going to flip. And where's my bill? Okay. And that looks good. That looks good. You want to get that out as neat as you can. If it's not exactly on the edge, it's not going to be a big deal if it's not, because it's just not a big deal. So, I mean, it's a big deal if you catch it, but it's not a big deal if it's not exactly on the edge. Okay, so let's see how that looks. Okay, so then this will come around, and we will, like I said, if you do buttonholes, you can put a buttonhole right there. If not, then you're just going to sew a button on there. That looks like might be a little big. Okay, so 3 inches. I might have to sew it way down here somewhere. By the looks of it, I think I might have made it a little too big. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to top stitch our back just like we did the other side. So let's put those edges in there, and let's see how that looks. That looks pretty good for our edge. Oops, I went right through them in fabric. Okay, so when we put our Velcro in, looks like we're going to have a pretty nice smooth finish there. Okay, so let's, you don't really have to worry about tucking in because your Velcro is going to cover that side. So let's go ahead and do a top stitch around this piece. Okay, you might want to, so it looks nicer.